Hello and welcome to Kids Health Revolution Radio. I am your host, Deborah Morgan. Glad to be with you as always. I want to take a couple of minutes and just talk about something. Last week, we talked in the beginning of the show a little bit about patience and how this healing journey for your child is really the long game. And we need to be realistic about expecting quick results. And there's another little piece that goes with this that I think is really important that we take a couple of minutes just to talk about, because I think parents really need to be aware of what we call the healing crisis in this work. And it's pretty simply just the idea that sometimes we will notice a spike in symptoms, or your child may seem to get worse at the beginning of your healing process before they start to get better. And it is so important that we're aware of this and expecting it before we begin, so that we're not freaked out or so completely discouraged by the flare-up that we end up just giving up on it. So generally, this healing crisis we regard as a sign that something is changing in the body. And usually that is that detoxification is starting to happen in the body. And it's showing up as a flare in the symptom in that weakest link that we've talked about, right? So your child's weakest link may be their skin, it might be their lungs, it could be their brain with behaviors. So wherever that weakest link is for your child is where we tend to see the flare in the symptoms when we're in these beginning stages and the child is really beginning to heavily detoxify, and we get this healing crisis. Now, if the flare-up is too severe, that's often a sign that the body is detoxifying and things are going just a little bit too fast. And in that case, we'd want to take some really strategic steps to slow down that process so the body's able to better cope with it and handle the changes that are going on. And this is really a matter of very careful and close observation on the part of the parent, and then just little adjustments to find the right balance for your child. Now, usually, before I freak you out too much, usually a detox reaction from just simple changes in your diet and dietary protocols, they're not always as major as we may see with some other protocols, like some of the homeopathic treatments, some of the herbal treatments, things like that, where you're definitely going to be working with a licensed practitioner that's going to be walking you through that. But even with the dietary changes, there can be some slight reactions because there are changes going on in the body. And let's look at a couple of quick examples. So when we change our diet so that we are helping to balance the microbiome in the gut, that means that we're essentially starving out some of the pathogenic and the opportunistic species. And those guys are going to kick up a bit of a kind of a metabolic storm as they go, and the body has to detoxify that. So that's one thing that you can see that may flare up their symptoms for a time. Another one that's really important, because I know a lot of people start by going gluten-free, and especially if their child's issues are with behavior, they notice that they take gluten out of their child's diet and the behaviors just go off the map. It's like their kids go crazy for a while and they're pretty bewildered by the change, and I get that. And it's really important to recognize that for some kids who have a certain kind of dysbiosis in the gut, taking gluten out of their diet means that they are quite literally going through a drug withdrawal and detox. Because what happens with those particular bugs is that they kind of hijack the metabolism of the gluten, and it's turned into an opiate substance called a gluteomorphin, and that accesses the brain. So quite literally, the child becomes addicted to the gluten because it's producing this drug that's going to the brain. So if you have a child that almost exclusively eats processed foods and breads and sweets and things that are made with gluten, this is possibly part of what's going on, is they are actually physically addicted to it. So when we take that out of the diet, they're going to go through a major drug-like detox. And it can be pretty bizarre to watch, but just like anything, if you ride it out, if you watch it and you're just careful with it as time goes on, it will level out and they will start to experience the benefits of having that out of their diet. So those are just a couple of examples to give you so that you can see how important it is to be aware of these possibilities when you start out, because I don't want you to mistakenly think that no good is coming of your dietary efforts, and then you just give up on it too soon before you reap all the benefits. So a question often is, how long does this last? So it's really difficult to say, but a reaction from the changes in diet can vary from just a couple of days to 10 days, and sometimes a little bit more depending on how out of balance the microbiome is in the gut. So if you've made changes, dietary adjustments, and you feel like your child's not progressing as you'd like, or they're having these flare-ups in the symptoms and you'd just like a little bit of guidance, I would really encourage you to consider consulting a holistic practitioner, someone like myself who's trained in nutrition, or even a naturopath or a homeopath, or somebody that can help give you some guidance through that part, so that you feel supported and you can continue on that journey. So, with all of that said, today's show is all about hope for healing our kids. And I am so looking forward to talking with our guest today. Her name is Beth Lambert, and she is the founder and executive director of Epidemic Answers. It's a nonprofit organization which is dedicated to educating the public about the epidemic of chronic illness affecting our youth and helping parents find healing solutions. Beth is also the creator and the executive producer of the Documenting Hope Project, which is very exciting, and I'm really looking forward to chatting about that. And she is also the author of a book called A Compromised Generation, The Epidemic of Chronic Illness in America's Children. So welcome to the show, Beth.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on. I'm so glad you could take time out. I know you guys are so busy with your project, so it's great to have you here. So I always ask guests, just before we jump into drilling you with questions, to maybe share just a little bit about your story and what got you on this path to writing books and making documentaries and starting nonprofit organizations.
Oh, sure. I think I got into this the way that many people get into this world, which is through our kids. And so I was a young parent with little kids, and, they were kids who were having symptoms, symptoms that you kind of knock on the doors of different practitioners to get answers about. And I knocked on a lot of conventional doctors' doors, gastroenterologists, allergists, psychiatrists. Trying to understand why my children were having various symptoms. And when I got no answers, I ended up looking deeper. And ended up in the office of an integrative physician and started working with some holistic practitioners. And that's where I got the answers. So my own personal experience of, having children who had symptoms, getting some help through, stepping outside the box, working with integrative and holistic practitioners. And that's when I began to explore this whole world of health and healing that I didn't know existed before I had my own kids. Not only that, but as I went through the experience of healing my kids, and they're fine now. We've come out on the other side of, a whole bunch of health issues. But that experience opened my eyes in a number of ways. First, it made me realize how many kids out there are sick. It's the kind of thing where I noticed my own kids had symptoms, but then I looked around on the playground or, at daycare centers and the preschools, and all the kids had something, whether it was asthma, ADHD, developmental delays, speech delays, autism. It was everywhere. And it was this moment of awakening when I said, this isn't childhood. This isn't what it's about. Why are all these kids so sick? It's this kind of bright light that all of a sudden shone on what I think is the most pressing issue of our times. So I happened to be in grad school at the time that I was going through this healing journey with my family. And I just made it my mission to understand what was happening and why did we have so many sick kids. So that's what I did as I delved in and started interviewing people and talking to doctors and talking to families and talking to researchers. And what I basically came to the conclusion is that we have a massive, massive epidemic underreported, underrecognized, and certainly there are so many families out there that are struggling with chronic illness. And it became my mission, once I understood why we were having so many sick kids, and also that there are answers right here, right now, today. Kids are healing all the time. And the fact that we have answers for this problem is just, it's maddening that we're not applying these answers to this problem. So that's
on a wider scale.
That's right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Love it. And, I think I love what you say, that this is the most pressing issue of our time, because I absolutely agree with you. What can we expect for the future of our kids when this is how they're starting their lives out? And we're just not paying attention to it. So I love what you're doing and shining that light really brightly on it. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's funny, Deborah, there's so many people who think maybe that I'm overemphasizing the problem or overstating it, but I see this as a slow-moving train wreck. In other words, if you look at the rates of illness, whatever you're looking at, whether it's obesity or autism or, any of the chronic inflammatory conditions that are skyrocketing right now, they're a problem. They're an economic issue. This is an issue for parents, for families, for the medical care system. But if you project just a few years forward at the current growth rates, we're going to be crippled by this, economically, socially. I mean, even our national security becomes a problem because we're not going to have enough healthy people to fill a military. I mean, just to get really pragmatic about it. Mm-hmm. So, that's why I say it's a slow moving train wreck, because you don't see it. The train's kind of chugging by you. You don't see that it's going off a cliff. But I feel that, if we start paying attention to this now and see it for what it is, we have every chance to turn this around so that there is no train wreck. And I just hope that the more awareness that we spread, the more people begin to realize that this is a problem, and B, there's something we can do about it.
Absolutely. Well put. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about this chronic illness epidemic in our kids. Can you talk a little bit to listeners about, what's behind this massive increase in chronic illness? Yeah.
Well, I mean, first, it's hard for people to wrap their brain around that this is one thing, because most often, people identify with what their child has. So if their child has an ADHD diagnosis or a diabetes diagnosis or an autism diagnosis, that feels like they're different, but they're actually all part of the same thing. And why is because if you look at any of these new childhood epidemics, and by that I mean the things that are kind of skyrocketing in their prevalence, all of them have very common underpinnings physiologically. So if you take a child who has asthma or a child who has eczema or a child who has autism, what you're going to see is across the board the common underlying physiological imbalances. So things that, chronic inflammation, for instance, inflammation in the body, microbiome imbalances. You were talking about the microbiome at the beginning of this segment. So much of this has to do with what we've done to the microbiome. These kids have nutritional deficiencies across the board, cellular toxicity. So, you can see these things happening to all our kids, and the symptoms that we call asthma or the symptoms that we call autism, they manifest different in every child because their environmental hits have been different at a different time. But it's really the same series of things that are impacting all of our kids and precipitating these imbalances, these physiological imbalances. So it is one epidemic. And it is an epidemic that is, again, hard to recognize as one thing because people only see it through the lens of whatever their child's diagnosis is.
Right. And that goes along with our sort of medical approach these days, which is to divide things up, right? Autism, brain, asthma, lungs, eczema, skin, and not see the common link between all of those things.
That's right. And we're in this model, this medical model where we suppress symptoms. So if you have eczema, you put a cream on it, but you don't ask, why does the child have eczema in the first place? What's great about this new wave of healthcare, it's not really new. I mean, these kinds of approaches date back thousands and thousands of years and have kind of always been around. But I think science is really beginning to embrace a lot of the traditional healing modalities. And there's more emphasis on nutrition and looking at the human body as an integrated being, looking more holistically. What's great about all that is that those kinds of traditions are used to looking at the root causes and not suppressing symptoms. So when you look at the root causes, you're able to identify and address the problem. And that's how people heal. So you'd asked about, what is it? What's causing this massive epidemic? And again, if you look at the physiological imbalances, all you have to do is then take a step back and say, well, what might contribute to that? And a perfect example, again, to go back to the microbiome, because I think the microbiome is one of the single most important, things that is a factor in this epidemic. If you look at the microbiome, you have, as you said, an imbalance in the bacteria, the microbes in the gastrointestinal tract, or anywhere in the body, really, where you have opportunistic organisms or pathogenic organisms thriving, where there should be a more balanced commensal population of microbes. And that's really, really important because those microbes play an important role in your immune function. I mean, they literally turn your immune system on, signal to turn your immune system off. They help regulate your body's reaction to inputs, to food, to environmental factors. They help create neurotransmitters and precursors to neurotransmitters. And those are the things that are important for brain function, for behavior and mood. So the microbiome, if you think about environmental factors and how it impacts health, if you look at just one factor that impacts the microbiome, and there are many, but one factor in modern living that impacts the microbiome, look at the use of antibiotics since the post-World War II era. We have carpet bombed the human microbiome with antibiotics over the last 75 years. That has enormous impact on human health. So Elizabeth Lipsky, whom I'm sure is a nutritionist at the University of Maryland, has said that anyone who's taken one course of antibiotics will irrevocably change and alter their microbiome. That's really, really important to know and understand. And there are so many kids today who have been exposed to antibiotics from birth multiple times. And the mother was probably exposed to antibiotics. And the grandmother may have even been exposed to antibiotics. So we really are destroying the human microbiome. That's one of many factors that are contributing to this epidemic. But it's important that we start connecting the dots and saying the way that we're living, the types of medicines we're taking, the type of healthcare we use, what we're eating, what we're drinking, how we live our lives, that all is critically important for whether we're healthy or whether we're sick. Environment matters a whole lot.
It sure does. Yes, absolutely. I think, just before we have to take a quick break here, but I think, one of the things to mention with the antibiotics, and I love the visual of carpet bombing, one of the ways that we're insidiously getting these antibiotics is through our food, right? Through the antibiotics that we're pumping into our meat.
That's right.
And then it comes into our body and wreaks havoc. So, yeah, these things need to be on our radar. So we have to take a quick 1-minute break so everybody has a chance to go grab your cup of tea or a glass of water or whatever you need. And we will be back in 1 minute with Beth Lambert of the Documenting Hope Project. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Kids Health Revolution Radio. You're here with Deborah Morgan, and we are chatting today with Beth Lambert of many things, currently working on a very important project called the Documenting Hope Project. And just before the break, we were talking a little bit about, what's behind this epidemic of chronic illness in our kids and how they may show up in various places in the body. And as Dr. Tom O'Brien had said on another show, they're showing up at the weakest link in your child's body, but really fundamentally on a root level, they are all the same thing. And that is related to, these inflammatory conditions in your child's body. We were just talking about the microbiome. Beth, what are some of the other things that you see as contributing to this epidemic?
So another one is nutritional deficiencies. And so, what's really crazy about this is you could have a family who eats really well and makes every effort to give their children nutritious food, and yet still those kids will be nutritionally deficient in some way. And the question is, how does that happen? A conscientious family who's doing the best they can still can have a child who's deficient in zinc or magnesium or whatever it is, essential fatty acids. And part of that is due to the way we eat culturally. Sort of what does the Western diet look like? And the Western diet is one that is, overly processed. It relies heavily on processed carbohydrates and sugars and vegetable oils, and eats factory farmed meats. And that's not where we need to get our nutrients from. We need to get our nutrients from, foods that people have eaten traditionally for thousands of years, vegetables, nutrient-dense foods, good fats. And it's just not culturally part of the Western diet to eat those things. So that's one thing, So if you think you're eating something that's healthy, it may not be healthy. Example would be whole wheat. We're always told to eat whole grains. That's part of what, the nutrition authorities have said. And that actually is something that may be depleting your body of nutrients as you eat these whole grains rather than giving your body nutrients. That's one.
Yes. Thank you.
I also think that we have, soils that are completely being depleted of their nutrients. The way that industrialized food production is, we're creating tons of food, cost effectively. It's cheaper, but it doesn't have the nutrient density that it needs to. Not only that, but that overlaps into another issue, which is another one of the factors that is affecting our kids, which is toxicity. So the foods we're eating are laden with toxic exposures, whether it's the pesticides, organophosphates, or glyphosate, or, the fertilizers, all these things that are, that we use to produce our food are making their way into our bodies. And that's a toxic burden on our body. Our body has to deal with. And you were talking about at the beginning of the segment, again, detoxification. Why do our bodies need to detoxify so much? And the reason is because they're so burdened. Living in the modern world is a toxic place. So even if you are, again, really conscientious, like you buy all organic and you buy green cleaning products and you buy, the best kind of green consumer products that are out there, you're still going to have a body that is weighted down with toxins because it's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the soil. It is really, really hard in the modern world on this planet to avoid toxic exposures. And that's just what has happened as a result of industrialization and sort of this consumer-oriented world that we live in. And there's also been studies that show that, one of the biggest burdens of toxic exposure is consumer products. So if you think about people who maybe aren't being as conscientious about, eating organic or using green or friendly, biologically friendly products, they are constantly exposed to thousands and thousands of chemicals that have never been tested for safety, that have no known science about what this is doing in the body, as a single molecule, let alone what it does synergistically with other chemical molecules. 85,000 chemicals on the market that we have never fully tested for safety in the human body. So, part of, living in this world is this tremendous toxic burden. You need a certain level of nutritional status for your body to be able to effectively handle that toxic burden. So I've always called this epidemic the result of a perfect storm of environmental factors. And that's exactly what this is that you have all of these things that are kind of hits on the body. So you have a depleted microbiome, which is really helpful for us in terms of extracting nutrients from our food and also helping us detoxify. Then we're not getting enough nutrients from our food. Then we're getting all these toxic exposures on our body. So it's like we're totally hitting our body with all of this burden, this total load, as the theory has been called. But we're not supporting our body with what it needs to help eliminate this toxic burden, to handle it and manage it and metabolize it. So it's kind of like we're just hitting ourselves over the head again and again and again. And it's having, then when you have symptoms of illness, that's just your body saying, all right, I've had enough. I can't do anything else. Like I'm tipping over here.
Exactly. So do we have an idea of like numbers for this chronic illness epidemic? Do we know like what the scope of it is for our kids?
Yeah. So I can give you numbers for the U.S. I mean, and I would say the U.S. is leading the way in the world in terms of chronic illness epidemic, but other Western nations are following closely behind.
Very close.
Canada, Japan, Australia are all neck and neck with the United States in terms of childhood chronic illnesses. But right now we have 1 in 2 American children with a diagnosed chronic illness. And that's a diagnosis. So think about that for a second. Like my kids were sick when they were little. They had all these symptoms, but they never had a diagnosis. They literally never got a diagnosis because it wasn't what they had wasn't severe enough to merit, a real diagnosis, or because I got to integrative physicians early enough that, we never got that diagnosis. There's all these kids out there who have what I call the soft signs of it being impacted, but don't have a diagnosis. So for instance, the ones that are being tracked are autism, ADHD, obesity, autoimmune conditions. And then the ones that are not being tracked are the kids who have neurobehavioral problems that haven't been identified with a diagnosis, or kids who have chronic diarrhea, chronic constipation. They have chronic sinus infections. Like those are all the symptoms that these kids' bodies are breaking down, but they're not being tracked. So if you think about if 1 in 2 American kids have a diagnosis, and then a whole other subset of kids on top of that have some kind of chronic symptoms, you're looking at the vast majority of kids being impacted in some way. And then if you break that statistic down even more, you're looking at 1 in 8 kids with asthma in the US, 1 in 9 children with ADHD, and that disproportionately impacts boys. So, most of the boys out there are developing some kind of learning disability. They're having real problems with focus and attention in school. You have obesity and being overweight is 1 in 3 kids in the U.S. And diabetes is the next tidal wave that we're going to see in the next adult population as these kids begin to grow up. The thing that's most frightening to me is our stats around autism. The autism before 1930 didn't really exist. There may have been cases of neurobehavioral disorders that received a different kind of name. They weren't called autism at the time, but it was exceedingly rare. And now we have 1 in 45 children with an autism diagnosis, and that affects boys more than girls in a ratio of 4 to 1. And this has been said, time and time again. If you take the statistics, the growth rates over the last 4, 5, 6 decades, like how rapidly has autism been growing, and you project that growth forward, you're going to have 1 in 4 children impacted by autism by 2033. That's 1 in 4 kids. By my grandkids, that's my grandkids' generation. You're going to have a quarter of those children have autism. And if you think about the ratio 4 to 1, boys to girls being more impacted, how many boys are we going to have in 2033 that don't have autism? I mean, that's to me what is mind-boggling, is that, we have these statistics that you really can't refute the growth rates. You can't refute what kind of trajectory we're on. But we have an opportunity to recognize it today for what it is and turn it around. And that's what I hope we can do.
Yeah. What really stands out for me too with that trajectory and thinking about that is projecting then further into the future as those numbers of children with autism grow and become adults, and projecting even further to seeing that a quarter to almost half of our population will grow up to be adults with autism, and what that means for our entire society.
Right. And most people don't really understand what autism is. And part of the reason is because it's so new. They don't understand, first of all, that it's a medical condition. There's a lot of autoimmunity. There's nutritional deficiencies. There's cellular toxicity. There's oxidative stress. There's all these physiological things that are going on in autism. It's not a genetic brain-based disorder, which is what the current paradigm would have us believe it is.
Exactly.
So that's the first piece, is people don't understand what it is. The second thing is that people don't understand what it means to have an autism diagnosis. It's a spectrum. So there's people who are very high functioning. Everyone looks at Temple Grandin as this really spectacular success story of autism. She's brilliant. She's made so many important contributions to the world. We all respect and love Temple Grandin, but she's a very rare case of autism spectrum disorder. She lives independently, but so many families right now who are kind of that first wave, major wave of autism, got their diagnoses in the early 90s and they're now aging out and they're becoming adults. they're not living on their own. They're not able to hold jobs. I mean, some of them are not able to do much self-care at all. So that's really concerning because these parents are struggling. They have this enormous burden that the generation before them never had to deal with. And it's also now a social problem. What kinds of impacts does this put on our social support services? And it really is something that we need to think about as we project these growth rates forward. What is going to happen to all these children that are going to grow into adulthood with autism? And what's so interesting to me, and mark my words, this is going to happen. Autism used to be, and still is to a large degree, called a childhood disorder because it was only seen in children because it was new and it was happening to children. It wasn't something where you had tons of adults with autism walking around because it was like the first wave of kids that we'd never seen before, in a large population. They're going to stop calling it a childhood disorder, and it's just going to become this normal adult thing that people have, kind of like Parkinson's or MS, but they won't even see it like that because they don't see it as a medical condition the way MS or Parkinson's is. But it's no longer going to be a childhood disorder, and we're just going to let that slide. It's kind of like, why do we not understand that this was like a bolus of children, a whole epidemic that was in one generation of children that are now going to age out into adulthood? Like, we've got to see it for what it is.
Yes, we do. And, you're so right with that. Even, if you look at ADHD, that's already making the transition into us accepting it as also an adult condition.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, so, I always call these things the new childhood disorders, but I don't know how much longer that's going to even apply because they're all aging out,
Yeah, exactly. And where do we go from there? And I have a very good friend whose son is autistic, and that whole vision was one of the things that pushed her into the whole integrative approach, because she couldn't imagine if her son was so dependent on her for the rest of his life, and what happens when she's not around anymore.
Right.
What happens to him then? And so she has worked tirelessly at finding solutions for him and addressing all of these underlying root issues. And with amazing success, he is now a very high-functioning autistic child and will go on to be a high-functioning adult. But because there was intervention that was done for him. And it's so important that parents start to realize that. And I think that I'd like to say that this isn't just the problem of those of us parents who have children with a diagnosis or with a child even who has undiagnosed health conditions, but I think everybody needs to be aware of this because, sure, it affects us as parents and we struggle and we don't want to see our kids, suffering, but, it's a bigger problem because, as you say, going forward, very practically speaking, we're not going to have the healthy population to even run things like our defense systems. And, who's going to do all of these things? Who are going to be our doctors and all of these things when everybody is struggling with their health?
That's right.
Yeah. So we have like 3 minutes before break. Do you think that's enough time to kind of talk a little bit about why the conventional medical approach is not really well equipped to address this chronic health problem?
Yeah, I mean, we need like 3 hours to talk about that, but I think it can be synthesized in just saying that our current medical system was not set up to deal with the chronic illness epidemic that is environmentally derived. It didn't exist before, right? This is new. This is a modern industrial era, and we're seeing health problems that are a function of the modern industrial era. Conventional medicine is excellent, amazing at acute care, like emergency medicine, surgeries, like all these life-saving things that have been developed. I'm so grateful to live in a society where we've developed all these amazing medical skills and techniques and knowledge. But it's not knowledge that really applies to the chronic illness epidemic or how to deal with this. So we need to think differently and to shift into a new paradigm in order to deal with the chronic illness epidemic. You cannot take a pill to reverse a problem that developed over months, days, years, and developed as a result of daily inputs, what you eat, what you drink, what's going on your skin. The way you deal with this is by changing the things that you eat, what you drink, what goes on your skin, how you're thinking. That's how you deal with it. And conventional medicine is not suited for that. So I think that's the fundamental disconnect that we're experiencing right now. And parents are going to their doctors saying, I've got a child with eczema, I've got a child with asthma, I need help. And they say, well, I have this medicine for you to suppress the symptom, but I can't do anything more. And the medicine suppressing the symptoms are not making the problem go away. The only thing that will make the problem go away is to change our lifestyle.
Right on. Amen, as they say. I absolutely agree. And, there's no way around it. We cannot, as you say, develop a pill that's going to solve these problems. And that's the mentality and the approach that's kind of gotten us where we are today and gotten us into the trouble that we're in today. Mm-hmm. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about how we're going to turn this whole thing around. And then I'd like to spend some time talking about your wonderful project that you guys are working on. So we will pop off for one more minute, our last 1 minute break, and we will be back with Beth Lambert to chat a little bit more. Hello and welcome back to Kids Health Revolution Radio. You're here with Deborah Morgan, and we are talking today with Beth Lambert. And just before the break, we were talking a little bit about, the chronic illness epidemic in our kids and how we are not going to solve the problem through our usual approach of looking for quick fixes and a pill we can just swallow. We need to look at and I like how Beth puts it, the input, what we're putting in and changing what we're putting into our bodies. So, Beth, maybe we can kind of continue there and just talk a little bit more about how we turn this epidemic around.
Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges with this epidemic is that it is so culturally derived, meaning the reason why we're all sick and our kids are so sick is because of the way we're living. I mean, that's just the simplest way to put it. It's, again, the way we're eating. And if you think about food as so embedded in our culture, if someone tells you that what your mama fed you is bad, like that hurts, right? That's really cutting to the bone of who you are culturally, because food is so tied into our culture. Yes. But it's not just food, it's the way we live our life. What do we do for entertainment? What's the type of way we take care of ourselves when we're sick or when we have symptoms? Like, that's part of our culture. So we really need to think about the solution here is just a cultural shift. It's just a shift in how we live. And that's not, it sounds like that's a big deal, but it's really not. Cultural shifts happen all the time. So what it takes, though, is that you have, a couple influencers or opinion leaders or people that start making those shifts on their own, and then it begins to sort of dissipate and throughout the rest of the culture. We are so media driven right now. We're, Western world is so, that's all we do all day long. We're on our phones and our iPads and watching TV and our computers, that I firmly believe that part of that cultural shift will happen through media. So that's why we've, that's why we've designed the Documenting Hope project the way that we have, because there's a core media component. So essentially, what I mean by that is, the Documenting Hope project is a pilot recovery program where we're taking a small group of children who have one of these diagnosed chronic illnesses, and we're making those changes with them and for them, asking their family to change their diet, change all of the things in their lifestyle that might be contributing to their child's chronic illness. And then we are documenting those changes and what that does to that family and what that does to the child over a period of time. And we're documenting it scientifically. So we're measuring things that you can measure, minimally invasively in blood, urine, and stool. So we'll be watching markers of inflammation go down, markers of oxidative stress go down, markers of nutrition go up. And then we're going to document it on film, because we want to share this inspiring message that, again, environment matters. What you put in your body, around your body, matters. And here's the proof in the pudding, not just scientifically, but we're going to document it on film so that we can show people through, various media, documentary film, online, et cetera. It matters. And look at the changes that happened to these families when they actually made those changes. And you can do this for your family too. And here's how. So I believe, again, we are at we are in this place because of how we are living. It's our culture. But I firmly believe that's not bad news. That's good news, because that's easy to change. Like, that is something that happens all the time. We just need to push that paradigm shift to happen a little sooner than it might otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So the wave, I agree with you. I think, the wave is growing. There's people that are out there leading the way. And I think it will start to grow and grow and grow. And I 100% agree that I think that reaching people where we are, which is, online and through media, is a really powerful way to do it. I have to say, one of the things I really love about the Documenting Hope project is that you are, documenting and following the stories of these different children. So it's not just, interviews with people talking about what's possible and what you could do, not experts just giving their opinions, which is great. And it gives us a lot of information that we can use. But I think that having these actual case studies that you can showcase for people as examples of shining examples of what is possible makes the message that much more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because people relate to stories, right? I mean, how often do you hear about when somebody gets a diagnosis, they seek out the other people who also have a similar diagnosis and that got better? And what did you do? And how did you do it? And what worked for you? Like, the stories compel people. There's no question about that. But what I'm also interested in, too, is making sure we have the science to validate it, because this is what happens right now. So a parent gets a diagnosis of autism for their child. They go to their pediatrician's office, or even sort of a neurologist or a neurodevelopmental specialist who's supposed to be the expert in autism. And the parent says, I've heard that changing diet makes an impact on autism. And the doctor inevitably says, well, there's no evidence to support that, and I wouldn't bother. It's too hard, and, it's going to put too much strain or stress on the child and the family. No, don't bother. That is the most tragic thing I've ever heard in my life. Number one, what is wrong with, increasing nutrition and making improved diet improvements? Why shouldn't a doctor back that every single time? We have this whole thing in Western medicine that is like, evidence-based. And yes, of course, we want to base our healthcare recommendations on things that have been demonstrated and proven and that there's evidence. But in this case, there is such a dearth of nutrition education in the medical community that it seems almost crazy that they aren't taught the evidence that's already there. There's so much evidence in the medical literature for how important nutrition is to everything from autism, ADHD, to Parkinson's disease, that the physicians are not trained in it. They're not taught about it, so they don't recommend it to the parents. That's the first piece. The other thing is that the Documenting Hope project is trying to create more evidence that these things matter. Nutrition matters. What you put on your skin matters, and make it irrefutable, so that when a parent goes to their pediatrician and says, should I take these consumer products and change them into something more green? Should I change my child's diet? The doctor says, yes, of course. There's plenty of evidence to prove that. We want to put the pressure on the medical system to look at the evidence that's already there. It's not like we're pulling this out of the ether. The evidence is there, but we need to push it harder. That's why we want to bring it to the parents directly through media, is because we believe in grassroots movements, and we believe that if you bring the evidence to the people, that they will bring it back to their doctors.
They're going to make the push, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's where the difference starts to happen.
That's right, because we have a systemic institutional failure with our medical system right now, because the doctors are trained in one method, which is this pharmaceutical symptom suppressive method, right? It's kind of, identify the diagnosis, identify the pharmaceuticals that are available and, FDA approved for that diagnosis, and then recommend them for the patient. But very little is done. And I'm generalizing. There are some amazing doctors out there who start with lifestyle always. But I'd say the general, the first line is not to start with diet. It isn't to start with lifestyle. It isn't asking about sleep patterns. It isn't asking about how much natural sunlight does your child get. They aren't asking about what's in the home environment that might be harming the child. It always feels like that's too hard for a doctor to bring that to a family. So I feel like that is, that's a shift we're pushing for. That's what we want to see happen.
Mm-hmm. And, I have to say that I do take it as very encouraging that there seems to be a lot of interest from medical doctors in the functional medicine modality and becoming trained in that and furthering their understanding of it. So, as you say, the evidence is there and it's been there for some time. And I think that there is a small wave starting of conventional medicine sort of turning their heads a little bit in that direction and saying, maybe there is something else in another way. And so I take that as very encouraging. I just had a client come to me the other day with a son who's autistic, and they're wanting to change his diet. And their pediatrician actually said to them that there is a connection between autism and the gut, which I was just thrilled to hear that they'd said that, right? So yeah, I think, as you say, there's a long way to go. But I think that, there is some momentum, and I really hope that what you're doing with the Documenting Hope Project is going to provide that extra push from parents that's going to get the momentum going even harder and make those changes.
That's right. And I think you just nailed it in that it's almost like this integrative approach to health it started out as kind of like a niche, and these doctors who had to be a little bit of pioneers, they had to step outside their training. They didn't learn this in medical school. They had to get this as additional training. Yeah. And so they're the ones who, that's why the Documenting Hope Project exists, is because these integrative physicians, these holistic healers are out there doing the work. They're the boots on the ground. They're getting these kids better in collaboration with parents. It's a partnership, which I think is such a cool model. It's not like the doctor standing on high saying, this is what you do. This is the parents and the clinicians collaborating, and the kids are getting better. So to me, that's like, oh, look at this. We have this amazing group of people out there that are already doing this work. We just need more attention on what they're doing, and we need to have more people trained so that more families can be helped. Exactly.
And I think that that's exactly what you're doing. So let's take a few minutes here and talk about the Documenting Hope Project. As you say, you're looking to film this and to give it out to people. So what does the project need?
So right now we are in the development stage. We've been developing this program for over 2.5 years. We're working in collaboration with Dr. Martha Herbert, who's a pediatric neurologist at Harvard Medical School, and a whole advisory board. If you go on our website, documentinghope.com, you can see some of the medical and scientific advisors that are working with us on this project. And we are at the stage where we really need to get funding in right now. We've raised a couple $100,000 for sort of seed capital to build the infrastructure for the program. But now we need to get the rest of our funding in to make sure that we can actually enroll the kids into the program. Our hope is to enroll the first kids into the program in the spring of 2017. And our first location is the DC metro area. We're setting up other locations in the U.S. We're setting up a location in Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and we have a fourth location we're evaluating right now. But what we really need is funding. So we need people who have an interest in helping us crowdfund. We have a crowdfunding campaign that's going on right now. documentinghope.com/donate is where we're running our campaign. On Facebook and Twitter, we need to help spread the message so people can help us by sharing everything that we post on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But we also need connections to private family foundations and individuals who really want to make an investment in our children and our future and believe that this is an important piece and body of work that needs to be completed. So, and if anybody has any, ideas of who might be able to support this project, please contact me at beth@documentinghope.com or beth@epidemicanswers.org.
Okay, perfect. So hopefully we have some listeners out there that will have some great creative ideas and are inspired by what they're hearing and want to help make a difference, not only for themselves, but for other parents out there that are really going to benefit from this project. So it can be through recommending some private funding through an organization or doing a donation yourself. It doesn't have to be huge, but some sort of donation to their crowdfund campaign as well. And then you can say that you're part of the Documenting Hope Project. let's talk just really quickly. We have just a couple of minutes. I like what you're doing on your Facebook campaign. It's the hashtag Give Hope campaign. Can you tell listeners a bit about that?
Yeah, so for the month of November and into December, we have been sharing stories of recovery. And our goal for this month is to give hope to families who are working with a chronic illness with their child. And we want people to know that kids can get better. And here's all these amazing stories of kids that got better. So we're sharing these stories on Facebook and Instagram, and we're asking other people to share them because we want to spread the message that this is possible. We also have right now a $100,000 matching donation. So as we're sharing these stories, we're asking people to make a donation because it'll be matched up to $100,000. Through December 10th is how long our campaign is going on. So, share the stories, give people, and then give hope to the families who are going to be enrolled in our program because they need that financial support in order for this to take off.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And I've shared my story for my son, and I love that you are getting a lot of stories pouring into you. That is so encouraging. So if you are listening and you have a story that you would like to share, you can do that. How do they email if they want to share a story?
Share your story by emailing it to givehope@documentinghope.com. Givehope@documentinghope.com.
Okay, perfect. And then you could throw a little donation into that, and you are doing an amazing thing to help this beautiful project reach the masses. And I wish you all the luck in the world with what you're doing with this. I think it is amazing, and I'm so glad that you've taken this project on for our kids and for our society in general. And I really give you a big thank you for joining me on the show today.
Well, thank you for your kind support, and thanks for helping to get the message out too.
No problem. And thanks to the listeners for tuning in today. And I look forward to talking with you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Kids Health Revolution Radio. Please join your host, Deborah Morgan, again next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We'll talk to you again next week.